Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast, September 11th, a day that needs no year to explain its meaning, a day forever marked in our memories. As we vow to never forget its horrors, history reminds us September 11th has important ties to Texas history in unexpected ways. Today, we roll back time to reveal what September 11th meant during the Republic of Texas era. Then we'll jump forward in time to 2001, when the world as we knew it changed in an instant, and the solemn reminder now on display at the Alamo. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. We're joined by Ernesto Rodriguez, the Alamo Senior Curator, Historian, and Lecturer. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here, Emily.
We're going to spend the first part of this episode talking about the events of September 11th, 1842. But before we get there, tell us about a key figure that day, Adrian Wall.
Adrian Wall is one of those interesting individuals that starts his career out as a French soldier during the wars against Napoleon. And when the Bourbon king is placed back on the throne, he has to find a new avenue for himself. And so he ends up coming to the U.S., where he meets a gentleman by the name of Winfield Scott, who tells him, you must pursue interest in Mexico, for Mexico is in revolt. It's the same thing that Winfield Scott would tell Francisco Javier Mina. And so it just so happens that Wall ends up with Mina on his expedition into Mexico, and he's with Mina until Mina's demise in 1817, when he is captured and executed by the Spanish government. He then will end up casting his lot with Santa Anna. And so he will then fight with Santa Anna for the remainder of the war, and he will basically stay with Santa Anna through the early period of the Mexican Republic, basically until about the late 1840s.
So he fights in the Texas Revolution on the side of Mexico.
Yes, he does. He's here for the Texas Revolution. He's one of the quartermasters. And so he arrives in San Antonio on March 8th and then travels east with Filisola. After the defeat at San Jacinto, he will become basically one of Filisola's right-hand men and is instrumental in the evacuation of Texas with Filisola. And so he is a prominent person in the Mexican government during this time, and he also has interactions with some of the main people of the time. Ramirez and Sesma is one of the others, right? He travels with Ramirez and Sesma. Ramirez and Sesma is a cavalry commander for the Mexican army. But Wall is one of those interesting people because you wonder, why is a Frenchman now involved in the Mexican government? Well, the same reason that the second in command of the Mexican army, an Italian, is involved. A revolution that broke out in 1810 through 1821 brought these people that were basically soldiers of fortune, and they end up staying in their new adoptive country for most of their careers.
Fast forward to the summer of 1842, Wall receives orders to invade Texas. Who were those orders from, and what was the reason?
The orders are from Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna himself. And the reason is you want to be disruptive to the Texas government. They know that Texas is becoming a place where the U.S. is investing in, and they're sending people, and people are moving to Texas. And so how do you disrupt it? You invade it to show them as well that you are really not independent. We can come in at any time. Now, the first of the raids will happen in March of 1842, and it's known as the Vasquez raid. Rafael Vasquez is sent north. He comes into San Antonio. He captures the town, and then he evacuates the town 2 days later and goes home. That upset Santa Anna because his job was to show them we're here. So he prompts Wall to do the same, and Wall does make his way north.
He enters San Antonio on September 11th, 1842, with 1,300 troops, and invades from the west with cannon fire.
He comes in through the old smuggler's road, and it just so happens that when he arrives here, there's court that's happening, so he's able to take control of a lot of important figures here in San Antonio, and he also manages to hold the town for a while. Texans that have been apprehensive now because of the Vasquez raid are starting to arm themselves and start marching towards them, and they try to lure Wall into a trap. Now, the trap would be great if you had set it up for the number of cavalrymen that he had, but they did not. They were prepping for a smaller group of cavalry. Now, Wall has his entire cavalry mounted up, which is about 500 men. They chase after these Texans that came to stir trouble, and they rout them at the Battle of Salado Creek. Salado Creek is a really important thing because it sets the tone for what will happen later. At the same time, there's the Dawson Massacre, and it's called that because the commander was a gentleman by the name of Dawson. About 52 men go out there, and only about 2 make it out. And the people of this massacre, we have items in our collection from these events. And it just so happens that there's some of these from a prisoner by the name of Woods. He goes to prison, and he's marched to Perrote prison, and while there, he carves pipe bowls, and we have them on display now. The Woods family, we have their cast iron pot. It's a Dutch oven that was used during the runaway scrape, so it's an old family, so the original 300. And so we have these items that you can come see in our collection.
They're on the first floor in the Alamo exhibit of the Ralston Family Collection Center.
Yes, they are.
The Dawson Massacre and the Battle of Salado Creek happened on September 17th. On September 11th, when Wall invades San Antonio, a lot of this activity centered around Main Plaza near San Fernando Cathedral. There's now a Texas historical marker on the plaza describing the Wall invasion.
Yes, there is. That's an important thing. A lot of things happen in Main Plaza in the 1840s during the Republic. This is one of the bigger events that happens that deals with 2 different nations. There's another event that will happen in March of 1840. That's the Texans versus the Comanche Nation. Totally different. But Main Plaza is really important. San Antonio is the seat of power unofficially in the South, right? Because, we have a capital as a republic. But we are the first major city that you'll hit before you hit the newly formed city of Austin. And what happens with the Vasquez raid, it prompts Sam Houston, who's the president, to consider moving the capital from Austin to his home city of Houston. And it leads to the Archive War. It leads to all these other problems. But it also forces the hand of the Texas government, and we need to prepare.
As a result of the Wall invasion on September 11th, 1842, 52 Texians, including Samuel Maverick, are marched more than 1,000 miles to a Mexican prison.
They're marched down to Perrote prison, and Perrote prison was a prison that was basically used by the Mexican government for all types of prisoners, especially political prisoners. It was in use for a long time. During the Texas Revolution, there's a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Rush Milam that escapes from that prison and comes and fights in the Revolution. So it's a place where most of the prisoners are taken. It's not an easy march. It's a tough march. You can imagine following the other 2 fights, the Salado and Dawson Massacre, some of these wounded men that are being forced down. A lot of them will die on the way. A lot of other things occur that are terrible along the road, but when they do make it, how long will you be there? What are your conditions? They're terrible. When the U.S. Army invades Mexico, basically during the Mexican War, they go to these prisons, and the conditions are horrific.
The Mexican government considers Wall's work a success. He's promoted to Major General and awarded a Cross of Honor. What was the long-term impact of his military action in September 1842?
The long term is that it forces Texas to really reevaluate its defenses. It also starts to make entering the Republic really, really needed. It leads to other things, right? Because soon after the Wall invasion, we have the Somerville expedition, because now you've got a group of men that are armed that want action, and they start their march south. And it falls apart fast, and it becomes the Mier expedition. And you have people that will make a name for themselves in the Mexican War in there. One of them in particular is a gentleman by the name of Samuel Hamilton Walker, who is a Texas Ranger and will become known for a firearm that he has Colt produced for him. But it also leads to a really interesting episode, and it's the Black Bean episode. And the reason that all happens is with the Mier expedition, they arrive in the town of Mier, and they're out of supplies. They need food and other things. And when they get to the town, they capture the mayor. They tell the mayor, hey, you need to bring us stuff. And it's Christmas. And so he goes back, and then they go into town. The Mexican army is there, and there's a fight. It ends up with them having to surrender. And then they're being marched to Perrote prison when they escape. They don't know the terrain, and as a result, they're recaptured. Santa Anna is upset, and he says, execute them. And it's at this point where I guess someone must have said, remember what happened before when you executed hundreds of men? It looks bad. So they decide on like a raffle. They have a jar, and they fill it with white beans, and every 10th bean is a black bean. They mix it up, and then they come up to you, and let's say that the officer in command will walk up to a soldier, tell him, reach in, you pull out a bean. And if you're lucky enough to pull out a white bean, you live. If you pull out a black, you die. But then they hand you the jar, and then you hand it to your friend to pick a bean out. So it's psychological warfare as well, right? Because if your friend picks out a black bean, you basically handed your friend a death sentence. When this is over, there's one gentleman by the name of Robert Dunham, and he'll write a letter home, and it's titled Dearest Mother. And he's telling her basically, I have chosen a black bean and I'm about to be executed. That letter is sent home. It gets lost in the mail. It's not found for many, many, many decades later, and then it's attempted to be sent to the mother, and unfortunately she's passed on. But it's one of those really sad parts of our history. It shows that life is fragile. Government is fragile, and it all depends on the people that live there to protect it. And it's sad.
Good reminder. And I want to go back to something you said a moment ago. You drew a link between the wall invasion of September 11th, 1842, and the need for Texas to join the United States.
The best way to protect yourself is by having troops ready to go. And Texas had them. But you also have to remember, Texas was small. So we had a small number of troops that could be available. Mexico has an army, can be resupplied. They have that ability. Now, it's on a smaller scale because it's up north, but they're showing that by sending 1,400 men, by sending 700 men, compared to 400 or so that can take the field on the Texas side, it makes you really reevaluate your position. And you need a strong force, and the United States is that strong force. And it also can provide the support you need, because why were they sent up? To disrupt the economic supplies of Texas. And so if you have the U.S. Army here, you now have a barrier between Mexico and the United States, and you have that buffer so that you can continue to do things and work and grow your economy without the fear of another invasion.
Makes sense. And you've said before on this podcast, Thermopylae had her messenger of defeat. The Alamo had none. How did Wall invading San Antonio on September 11th, 1842 lead to this saying, which is now so familiar to Alamo enthusiasts?
Well, one of the people that's here soon after is General Edward Burleson, and they're prepping for the march to the border, basically, part of the Somerville expedition. And he says that speech, and the reason he does it is, once again, you're setting the mythology of the birth of Texas. And when you think about the Spartan group under Leonidas, the 300 men fighting overwhelming odds, and then you've got the 200 men at the Battle of the Alamo fighting overwhelming odds, you're building your mythology. And so by using that speech or those phrases, he's actually making a call for them to fight hard, because we are a Spartan band and we must fight for what we have. So it's that connection to the past, but it's also the birth of our myth, of our state as we are today. It is the birth of Texas, and what better way to do it? Through Greeks that were the founders of republics.
Moving now to the modern era. On September 11th, 2001, you had been working at the Alamo about a year. What are your memories from that day?
I remember it clearly because, to quote Enrique Esparza, it is indelibly seared in my mind. I woke up that morning, and I remember getting ready for work, and the TV was on. We were watching the news, and you saw the planes hit. Immediately, we knew there was something bad that was about to happen, but we had a job to do. So I came into work, and I arrived here, and I remember coming in, and Dr. Winders came in. We were talking about what had happened, and our director at the time had been here since really early in the morning, so he wasn't really aware of what had occurred. So we went and talked to him about the situation, and he immediately picked up the phone, and he called the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and he said, what do we do? There was still one plane missing. We didn't know where it was at. We were basically the home state of the President of the United States. We're the most visible site in the state of Texas. And at that moment, I remember we were told the Daughters of the Republic of Texas had made a choice. These men that died defending the Alamo were fighting for freedom. We will not let anyone infringe upon that, and we will remain open. That moment changed our trajectory. I remember we went out front, we told our staff we're remaining open, and Dr. Winders and myself stayed up front with our staff. The thing was, we were not going to let anybody do a job that we were not willing to do ourselves. We didn't know what was happening, so we were out there, and we met a lot of people from all over the world. that were coming in, and they'd ask, "Where's everybody?" And you would tell them, and they would immediately break down into tears, and they would run to their hotel rooms.
There was no social media back then.
No, there wasn't. And
There wasn't an easy way to find out unless you were by a TV, by a radio.
And it was a very, very solemn day. And I remember standing out front, watching people, and then slowly the mood started to change. And people started coming back. You saw that change from us being just a historic site to a beacon of hope, because we were open. We were the Alamo. We were standing for freedom, and we were not going to let anyone infringe upon it. And the Alamo went from being a historic site to being that beacon of hope for an unknown world that we were about to enter. You know, we have been known for having ceremonies for our men and women in the armed forces, but we became an even bigger site. People would come and pay their respects either before or after going off to war. And it really changed the way that people viewed us, because we made that stand. At the time when others shut down, we made sure to make it known that we were open.
You know, you walk around the site all day long. You talk to visitors. Over the years, I'm sure you spoke with a lot of those veterans. What are your memories from speaking with them?
When you talk to a lot of our veterans that were there, that went and fought in these wars, it's very humbling, because the majority of them will tell you, I had a job to do, and I did it. And you look at it and you think about a lot of them that left from Texas. First thing that they tell you is, we had a Camp Alamo. Our flag, the Texas flag flew over, and we sent a lot of these flags out to people that would request them. A lot of our armed forces would ask, and APO addresses, and you'd send them to them because, well, they wanted something from the Alamo. We had one group that I remember sent a letter, and they said, can you send us postcards so we can decorate our area? And we did, and we sent them postcards, and they had built a little front of the Alamo. And so it's a very special thing, that connection, because you're connecting the modern day to the past. You fight for the same ideas, this idea of representation, of freedom, liberty, honor, patriotism, everything dear to the American character, as it's stated in the Travis letter. We're still fighting for that today. And everyone has their Alamo. It just so happens that we are at the Alamo, and people still remember. And it's really, really an interesting time in our history, because we're at that phase now where students that are now in their early 20s have never lived in a world that has never had the tragedies of September 11th in their lives. It's sad for me, because I lived in the world before that. Going to the airport, being able to say goodbye to loved ones at the actual gate is something that is very special that you can no longer do. Going through all of the security as it is today, when you remember just going through a metal detector with your shoes on.
Life was very different.
It was.
You brought up Camp Alamo, and on the second floor of the Alamo exhibit at the Ralston Family Collection Center, if people go through chronologically, perhaps the last artifact they'll see is a bell from Camp Alamo. Tell us about that bell.
So that bell from Camp Alamo is very, very special. I've had the honor and privilege of meeting a lot of the men and women that served at Camp Alamo. That bell comes from a camp in Afghanistan, and it was given to them on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. They requested it from their friends from New York. And one side has the number of fallen firemen, the other one side has the number of fallen police officers. It has quotes from the famous speech that George Bush gave on September 11th. That bell was set up in the camp, and it's a reminder of tragedies of war.
When did they ring that bell?
For the fallen. It rang once too many times. It was set up by the Alamonians, as they call themselves, because that was the Alamo group. Inside the bell are the last names of all of the group that was there when that bell was installed. And when they shut the camp down, the former commander contacted the current commander at the time, and he said, that bell must go to the Alamo. Can you make it happen? And the person on the other line said, yes, we can. We are the Texas National Guard. And the bell came to the Alamo. And it's one of those really special pieces, because even in Afghanistan, they're still remembering this place.
I understand your team has taken special care to make sure that bell never rings again.
Yes. If you look at the bell, the actual knocker is wrapped in cloth, so that it will not bang and make a noise, because it no longer is a bell. It represents a bell, and it represents a bell with a specific purpose. And it's very important that we remember that specific purpose, that it's not something that you just ring because you want to ring it. It should never be rung again, because it represents the loss of life.
A few years after 9/11, in September 2004, the first volunteer dog inside the World Trade Center visited the Alamo. Tsunami, the German Shepherd, left a paw print in the Alamo guest book. And Ernesto, you were there.
Yes, I was. He was a gentle black German Shepherd. And it's one of those really interesting things because they played an important role following the tragedy of 9/11. And it's, our four-legged companions that went in to danger to try to save lives. And, unfortunately, we lost too many people during this. And the poor service dogs that we had going in there, a lot of them would die because of the same afflictions that would fall upon others. But it's one of those really interesting things because some heroes have four legs, and Tsunami was one of them. And it's really special because you think about the reason Tsunami was in town.
Tsunami was in town to model for the War Dog Memorial Sculpture located now on Long Island.
And it's really special. Why Tsunami? Well, one, Tsunami helped to recover many of the fallen.
Tsunami and dog partner Cody Bear recovered the remains of 21 New York firefighters, working alongside their human partner, Hal Wilson, a Vietnam veteran who you also met.
And it's one of those things that you can see the connection, right? And the thing about our furry comrades in arms is that, one, they're very, very, very loyal. And two, they show love in a way that people cannot express themselves. And you think about going into this type of situation, knowing that we are going to have trouble and they take the lead. It's really, really interesting to see how our service dogs have gone into places that people don't want to go into or can't go into. And they're really no risk their lives because they have a job to do.
This sculpture on Long Island was made by San Antonio artist Doug Roper, who actually has an Alamo connection. He's a member of the Copini Academy of Fine Arts, which is linked to the sculptor of the cenotaph.
Bill Copini was the person that won the award to build the famous Spirit of Sacrifice, better known as a cenotaph.
Ernesto, how did living through the historic events of September 11th, 2001 give you a new perspective in your role as an Alamo historian?
It helped me to realize that all history is connected. And in that connection, we're connected to the past because events are always going to be brought forth. It also helped me to realize September 11th, I was 28 years old. And so you think about the fact that I was younger, and it gave me a new way to see this site. And it also made me look into how people remember the Alamo all over the world by remembering places that are their own Alamos. It brings the story back, makes it a human story. That's the important thing. We deal with people. And September 11th and the events of September 11th, for a short moment in the history of mankind, we were one. And that was one of the most incredible things to see, where countries that don't agree with each other for a short time said, we are with you. We are one. We were privileged enough to be able to witness that after this tragedy, to be able to see one world come together. It's something I'll never forget. And it made history come full circle because one world, one history. As an Alamo historian, telling a 300-year history, you have to make sure that you connect all the dots. You have to make sure that all of the threads in the tapestry are all linked together, because if they're not, we are not telling a full story.
Ernesto Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Emily.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to a photo of Tsunami the German Shepherd's paw print in the Alamo guest book, plus a photo of the War Dog Memorial he posed for that's now on Long Island, plus a photo of the Camp Alamo Bell now on display in the Alamo exhibit. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo podcast.